Perfect. Okay. Thank you all so much for joining me. I'm really excited today. We're going to be talking spoon decoration, specifically milk paint. So kind of best practices, how to use milk paint, how to get milk paint to cure and be durable. And then I also really enjoy doing baking soda soaks or baking my spoons prior to painting them. I get a lot of access to birch, maple, and it tends to be very pale wood, very consistent grain. So I like to add in some deepened colors just for effect. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Today's session, feel free, anytime I pause, I'll stop talking after each kind of little knowledge tidbit that we put out there to feel like you can add your own contributions for how you use milk paint, how you oven roast, how you do baking soda soaks. I'd love it to be kind of a collaborative knowledge share rather than just Kaylyn knows everything, because the only thing I know, I actually learned mostly from Ryan and from other people on Rise Up. So I can't even take credit for all of the knowledge that I have. So do feel free to ask questions, have any comments on what you're doing. And then if you're painting along, we can pause and remove spotlights so that you can do a little bit of a show and tell on what you're painting today as well, which should be pretty cool. Any questions before we get started? And
yes.
Yes. Yes.
What is milk paint?
Oh, that's a great question. So milk paint, there's a few different companies that do it. There's Miss Mustardseed, that's accessible, I think, in the UK really easily, and then internationally as well. Old-fashioned milk paint, real milk paint, these are all different companies. And what it is a little powdered pigment that's added in with a milk protein so that when you paint with it, you mix it with water, so it's water soluble. And then it'll cure, it'll have a little bit of a cure and a nice smooth finish. So it is a paint type and it has milk in it. So it is not vegan, but it's food safe, very durable, and it's used often with wood projects. So if you go onto the websites, people paint furniture, people paint houses, and then it's used really often in Floyd crafts as well. And if I can ask everyone to go on mute, I'm getting some feedback that just started about a minute ago. If you're not actively asking a question, that would be excellent.
Because it's very interesting, but I mean, when we paint, we can use the pigment. Yep. And we actually use sour milk.
Okay, yeah.
So we mix sour milk and the paint, and then we paint on any kind of wood. Because it's easy to take away when it's not when you do something wrong or something like that. But
yeah, that's very cool. The sour milk's probably using the casein protein in some way, and then these little milk paints usually have lime in them and some filler agents as well, but again, kind of all food safe and natural. And then I really like Real Milk Paint as a company, not necessarily because I know anything about the durability compared to the others, but because you can get like little tiny jars of it, and this is enough to paint, 30, 40 spoons. So it lasts a very long time.
Well, thank you for letting me know.
Yeah, of course. Of course. And we're going to be painting a few different colors today. I've got some other colors, so if you ever want like photos of an example color, if you're going to buy something, and if I have it, you can. Otherwise, all of the milk paint companies will have like color profiles that you can pick and choose. And they're pretty true to color. And then depending on the darkness of your wood, obviously the paint will show up in a different color, unless you're doing like a 5-layer and the paint is fully thick. And so I'm going to take my main spotlight off, and we're just going to be looking at the video here with the actual painting happening. So I've got a collection of different woods that we're going to be working with today. Most of them are magnolia and a sweet cherry wood that's out here in Washington. It's a wild cherry. One of the things that I did just to kind of show you options for when you're working with kind of pale and plain wood is I went and I kept one raw. So this is magnolia. A friend's tree was chopped down, so I got some magnolia. And this is just the raw wood, finished cuts, complete magnolia. So it's very blonde, very pale. We'll talk later about baking soda soaks. This is magnolia with a baking soda soak. So it's still pretty pale, but you can see it's a little bit warmer in tone and color. And then it brings out a lot of the coloration around. This one has some knots because it was a bent branch. And then these two are magnolia as well. This one was that raw magnolia here, and oven baked. So you get a nice warm tone within that oven baking as well with the wood. And then to get even a deeper tone, this one was oven baked, and it was also previous to the oven baking, it was soaked in baking soda. So these two are essentially baking soda soaking, oven curing, or oven baking. And then these ones were not baking soda and oven baked, just to give you some options for like working with pale woods, trying to get some deeper colors, darker colors, if that's of interest to you.
Perhaps a dumb question, but how much baking soda do you dissolve in the water?
So I do like 2 tablespoons into a mason jar type size here. So I'll do like 2 tablespoons, and I don't buy the full on raw, like I just get the cooking baking soda. I know you can get like science grade stuff. And then I swirl it around and leave it in. And the wood species is really dependent on how long I leave it in. So like plum, I only need 20 minutes and it'll get a really lovely dark coloration coming to it. Anything with high tannins, you need like 20 minutes and the baking soda is good. The magnolia doesn't have that many tannins. So this is kind of, these two are the difference for what it looks like. And I do wood chips as well. So these are raw, these ones are baking soda soaked, and these are an hour for magnolia. Whereas the sweet cherry, wild cherry in Washington, you can see the same hour-long soak really darkened it up a lot more than that raw wood or that magnolia had. So 20 minutes is fine for some woods. I'll do an hour. I've done up to 2 hours. But once you do it for like 2 hours, you want to make sure you slowly dry your spoon again, just because you're reintroducing that moisture. And then honestly, when I'm doing my cooking spoons, I use a really tall mason jar I got from Goodwill. And I just do like a heavy-handed pour. I have no idea how much I pour in there. Maybe like 5 tablespoons worth in a large mason jar for cooking spoons. And for some cooking spoons, if I know I'm painting the whole handle, I don't need to get water and baking soda up the entire thing. I can just get like a small jar and just soak the bowl as well. That's an option. Any other questions on the baking soda? We're actually kind of talking through this whole process, so I'm happy to just continue talking about the baking soda soak before we get into the painting.
Yeah, I wanted to say, if you're like me and you don't like measuring things, you can just do what's called a saturated solution, which means you just keep adding it until it no longer dissolves, and then you know you've reached the maximum strength that you can in that amount of liquid.
That's a great tip, Julian. Thank you. Yeah, once that saturation. And that's kind of why for these larger jars, I just do a heavy-handed pour. I've tried different amounts of baking soda, like 2 tablespoons versus 4 tablespoons. Both are fully dissolved, so it's not that full saturation point. I have not noticed a different tone that more baking soda brings out once there's enough in there. So like 2 tablespoons to a mason jar is enough baking soda to get the oxidation happening and for the tannins to kind of start doing their thing and getting oxidized and bringing out that really lovely color. So I only put in as much as I need, but that full saturation point it doesn't hurt. Like just throw it all in there. That way, you know, you're getting the most out of the wood, especially if you have a slow oxidizing or a low oxidizing wood, you may as well just pump it up to get whatever you can, whatever color you can out of that process. And then you can use oxidizing as well as its own decorating technique. So this is one where I did a baking soda soak. So you'll see more orange around the outside here. So I brought out those tannins, it oxidized really nicely. And then I did finishing cuts to bring out that blonde of the sweet cherry again. So now it's got a really nice consistent border around the butter spreader. This is the Rise Up 27 template. And that's kind of a nice like little way that you can use your facets to add design with the oxidized tannin coloration within the wood. So you don't have to leave it fully soaked. You can carve it off if it doesn't work. So you can carve it off pretty well and you can use it and leave it as accents in the wood. There was a really nice axe mark on my little axe spreader. So I decided to like let this oxidize and then carve away the rest, but leave that little axe mark within the piece itself. So you can use it as a design technique if you'd like as well. It's fun. I like it to bring out some life in pale woods, and then pretty much any plum, I'll throw it in that because I think it just really warms the tone in a gorgeous way. Like plum is beautiful in itself, and then in some baking soda, it is really nice. And then these are the sweet wild cherry spoons here. And this one was baked without baking soda. This one was baked with baking soda. So there is a difference. It's not a major difference, but there is still a darker tone in the one that had the baking soda application before oven roasting. Any questions there? Anyone else doing baking soda? Anyone else have kind of some tips and tricks how you've used it? I have not had a chance to carve pear. I just saw that from Peter, but any fruit woods like apple oxidizes. It turns a little bit more of a gray brown from the apple that I've carved, but it still does add some depth and tone. So if you don't have like really nice heartwood in your apple and you just have some kind of blonder wood that you want to deepen, you can do that. Cherry does the baking soda really well. So I think anything that's, you know, you usually get some oxidizing as it's drying, it will likely bring that out even more.
I was going to say I've used baking soda on that apricot wood that I was carving a while back, and I just made like I don't know, like a poultice a little bit, and rubbed it on there, and didn't have to necessarily soak it. And that brought out the tannins or however.
That's excellent, Jeff. Thank you. There are some that are like this one's big leaf maple. This one was not baking soda soaked. This one was, so it brought out a little bit. This one was also baked just for like 15 minutes to add a tiny bit of tone, but spalted big leaf maple. It won't wreck your spalting lines. And then we'll talk about oven baking, but this one was scorched a little on the bottom. So you'll want to be really careful about not using too hot of an oven, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And then kind of Jeff's comment about using a poultice. This is holly. And this one was already a bit of a quirky spoon. And I put black tea in with the baking soda to try and darken this even more because it was a very weird gray. And I wanted a deeper color. So now it's kind of a gray brown color from this, which holly is like as white of a wood as you can get it, but it does oxidize as a bit of an odd color. And then this is white ash, which I don't think it's going to come through on the camera, but this one oxidizes like a bit of a swamp green. So it actually has kind of a green hue to it that's a little hard for the zoom camera with this light to pick up. But some really fun experiments. If you're thinking about, do I want to try and do the baking soda soak? Am I willing to see this wood color change? That's again where if you get some nice long long chips from your wood, you can throw that in the baking soda and that'll give you a good idea of what it will look like if you do a whole spoon. So that's helpful, especially when trying a new species of wood, because some of them do turn more of like a muddy gray than it is like a nice warm brown. So that's a good way to choose that variety.
I had one thing to add, which is that in my experience, using these kinds of chemical decorating techniques where you're relying on a reaction with the tannins in the wood can work really well if you've got a spoon that's got a lot of texture.
Yep.
So let's say you left your axing marks on the handle, or you've got some chip carving, or you've got a highly porous wood.
Yep.
Then that is going to find a way into those little crevices and will really bring out that decoration in a way that I find on a plainer spoon that it can be quite
I agree with that, Julian. That's an excellent point. The end grain seems to really pop with some color. This one's been baked, so some of the color came out of it, but chips do bring really lovely oxidizing out, and that texture, the axe mark, I think that always looks fantastic. So that's an excellent tip. Any other questions on baking soda? Otherwise, we'll probably just talk about oven roasting because we're looking at tones of wood, and then we'll hop right into painting.
I just want to show this one. It's birch. It's a little bit spalted, but not much. And I put it in baking soda, and I used a lot. But maybe you can see here, I was trying to take away a little bit. To see how much it stayed, but it was just a millimeter it goes in. But the difference is quite big between the light and the baking soda part.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a fun experiment. And sometimes, like you said, it may not come out exactly what you're looking for, or it may not come out as dark as you're hoping that it would turn, but it does have a reaction. So that's great. Thank you, Suzanne.
And I was actually trying on lilac also. And it turned a little bit greenish.
Yeah, yep, that's probably similar to the ash with the green color, which is it's pretty wild. I think that's fun. Nature.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else have any that they want to share or show if they've got a different wood species that we haven't talked about? Cool. All right. Cool. So the next thing we'll talk about is oven roasting. And I'm going to use Fahrenheit numbers. I apologize for not doing some calculations out, but we'll talk about oven curing for oils later. When I'm talking about oven roasting, it is wood that does not have any oil on it. So it's still that raw wood. It may be raw wood that has not done the baking soda soak, or it has. And the oven brings out just a darker color. It's essentially, cooking the wood. It smells a little bit like bread is baking. So you may want to tell your partners and family members that you're not actually cooking delicious food. You're just cooking spoons, because otherwise they will be disappointed. But this also brings out some really nice, dark, lovely color. And if you have little ray flecks, or if you have medullary lines, the baking will not get rid of them. Like, you will still get that sparkle within your wood. It just deepens the rest of the tone of the wood in a really lovely way. And then when you hit this with oil, which we'll do a little later today, it really sparkles nicely. So I do most of my oven baking probably a week or so after the spoons dry, because I want to make sure that they are bone dry. Because if you throw these spoons or objects in the oven, in a hot oven, and they've still got some moisture in them, especially if there's like a bark inclusion or a knot, that's going to increase the chance of that moisture leaving too quickly, and you'll get cracks. So just really make sure that your wood is as dry as it can be before approaching this. So these spoons right here were 375 degrees for 30 minutes for an oven roast. I've tried 300 and it brings some nice tone, but it doesn't darken it as dark as I like. So the 375 is nice. And then the 400 is where I had issues in the past with, I don't know where I put that spoon, with getting burns on the back. So the points where the spoon is touching your cookie sheet got burnt marks when I had it at 400 degrees. So 375 for my oven tends to work well. All ovens are a bit different, like their internal heat is not always as accurately measured as it says it is. So do a couple test runs on spoons that maybe have cracks or not perfect, just to see what the sweet spot is for your oven. And then a flat object like this, when I'm oven roasting it, I'll just put it onto a cookie sheet and then I'll flip it a couple times as it's roasting. So again, it'll get kind of that even toning and it's not going to burn as often. So maybe every 10 minutes, every 7 minutes, I'll just flip it. For a spoon, I tend to bake it just bowl up. But what I will do is for the first 20 minutes, I use tin foil to cover the end of the bowl because your thin tapered edge has a tendency to burn sooner, because when it's on a cookie sheet, that edge is actually pointed up. So it's closer to the heat of the top of your oven than the rest of the spoon is. So cover that and protect it with tin foil. Take that tin foil off just for the last like 7 minutes or so. And that has worked successfully for me. So, and then again, oven roasting when it has had a baking soda soak will get you slightly darker than without a baking soda soak. But again, every wood is unique, every species of wood, every branch within a tree. So you can go and kind of test out what works best for you on a spoon. But you can get, this is another big leaf maple one, and you can just get some really lovely color. And again, I don't know if that's coming through well on Zoom, but all of those ray flecks that I really like in our big leaf maple, they still show up when it's baked. So you don't have to worry about that being lost. But if you have color streaking, so if you have plum with like pink and purple color streaking, that'll disappear. And then if you have like these really, really pretty orange colors, that orange baked fully off. So you don't lose the ray flecks, but if you have a color tonality, that color tone will tend to go brown versus that color. So if you like the color, keep the color, don't bake it. If you want just a darker spoon and you're just interested in like preserving that glitter, then bake it. Questions?
Just going to comment that baked maple looks like it's natural walnut.
I know, right? And I never get access to walnut. I'm jealous of you all carving it all the time. And after I've carved like my 30th maple or whatnot, that's where I want to play a little bit. But yeah, it's kind of a fun way if you don't get access to darker woods in your area. If you're in a space where you only have birch or you only have, you know, a lighter toned wood, this is a nice way to play with it. I don't sell my spoons, but I've also heard that cooking spoons, if they're darker ones, tend to sell really well because people aren't worried about getting them dirty. I don't know if that's true or not. I just do it to mix it up a bit and have some variety in my spoon carving and decorating fun, essentially. But yeah, great, Peter. Thank you. You do have some beautiful walnut, I will say.
Yeah, embarrassment of riches. Well, it's not. Yeah, I'll go find some more.
When you're
Yes.
when you're cooking your spoon at 400 and you said you're getting burns, would you be able to elevate that just on a piece of scrap wood so that your spoon is not touching the metal and avoid the burn?
Probably, yeah. I think that would work well, or maybe even I don't know if you could put like several layers of parchment paper, but I bet if you elevate it on wood, then that won't have a hot spot against the metal. So I think that would work. The 375, just knocking it down 25 degrees has been a decent solution for me. And then also being better about not multitasking, because when I bake spoons, sometimes I'm also like burnishing other spoons, or I'm cleaning my kitchen because I needed to do dishes. And then all of a sudden you smell, because like when they start to burn and start to really darken, there's a big smell of it, not necessarily smoke, but when you're baking bread or anything, when it gets closer to that, you can smell it for sure. So just paying attention, checking the wood often. It's not going to stop the baking process if you turn it over and take a look at it and put it back in the oven. Just remember to wear mitts or something, because these do retain heat for a while. And then they lose their heat pretty quickly after you take them from the oven, so they won't keep cooking for very long, essentially.
I think the material of a spoon is pretty much similar like a bread or something like that. So it's not really different than baking bread or baking a spoon. So it's just a smaller amount, so it gets hot a little bit quicker than a big piece of bread dough or something like that. But I think in general, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, it's all plant material in some way or another, you know, ground up grain versus a little carved wooden spoon. Essentially, we're just cooking plants, cooking dead ones anyway.
Have we discussed yet whether you should oil before or after or during?
I oil after when roasting. I made the mistake of oiling before an oven roast, and it essentially bubbles all the oil to the top immediately, and it gets really sticky, really dotty, really inconsistent. So I'll bake first and then oil after, and it brings out really lovely color. I do an oven curing process on my oils, so I will put spoons in the oven with oil on, but not at that high of a temperature. I do 170 degrees Fahrenheit for my curing of oils in the oven. Baking the spoon, I do 375. And when you're doing the oven curing, you will not have any color change. So I can put this one for that oven cure for the oil, and it will not darken this really pretty blonde up at all. It's a good question.
Have you found any results in curing milk painted spoons, the oil in the oven, or have you not seen that affects the color in any way?
I have not seen an effect in the coloring at all. And I've done some on like my kitchen counter or leaving it out to cure on its own and then in the oven. But when you're using that low temperature, it has not had any impact on it. And then I did message the folks at Real Milk Paint, at least that specific company, and they gave the thumbs up on the oven curing process. I wrote out my whole process to make sure that I wasn't damaging their product. And they talked it through, not just the help desk, but they got in the, I sent some troubleshooting questions to them before this session, and they got a few of their experts to bless the process, essentially.
I just wanted to mention for anyone like me who uses like a significant portion of beeswax in their wood finish, that oiling your spoons while they're still piping hot is really good for the penetration of the finish into the wood.
So it'll melt the wax, right? The wax will be.
It'll melt the wax right into the wood. So when I bake my spoons, I take them out of the oven, and straight away I've got a linen cloth that's impregnated with my wax oil mixture, and I buff it on while they're hot. And I burn my hands a little bit, but that's okay.
That's similar to the technique of using a polissoir. It's that French technique where you take basically end of a broom, which is and you burnish a surface after you've waxed it, and it's the friction of the burnishing that creates the heat. I think that has the same impact on the wood.
Yes,
It heats it up. And then
if I'm not going to roast a spoon, then I will buff my wax in very vigorously with my linen cloth. And like a broom, a linen fiber is very, very slightly abrasive enough to be able to generate that kind of heat.
Yeah, it's generating the heat. That's the trick. Yeah.
Excellent. That's a really great tip. Thank you so much, Julian. Thank you, Peter, as well for those. I don't have wax in my oil anymore, but it's a really lovely finish. So I think keeping the spoons hot and completing that process is a really good tip. Anyone else with oven curing tips? Anyone else even has Celsius calculations that they want to share out to the group now that's worked? Well, have you had any other issues with wood being baked that we should all know about, just for that knowledge sharing?
Sometimes
I bake my
too
spoons
much. I've at times used.
I bake my spoon
oil
with 220. Sorry, Jeff.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Sorry, I interrupt you.
I was just going to say I've used too much oil at times and didn't wipe it off, and then baked it and come up with a really sticky spoon, and then burnished it and baked it again. because it was pretty much trashed, and that got a very nice thick sort of finish.
Yeah.
So that worked out well.
Excellent. That's a great one, Jeff. And we'll talk a little bit about that because I've done the same thing where you put too much oil and when you're oven curing, the oil will rise. One nice thing is you can kind of check it every 5 minutes and wipe that excess oil off. It should only happen the first couple minutes within the baking. But like you said, if oil dots do come to the top of it, if you burnish it, that'll remove that stickiness or the bumpiness of the oil and bring it down to a really beautiful finish. So we'll talk a little more about that in a bit, but that's an excellent tip because I've gone through that same experience in my own baking of spoons. Well,
I made the experience that the oil was, so I was making the experience that the oil was sort of burning. So it was tastes bad or smells bad. So I would also recommend doing the baking after the oiling. No, the other way around. Sorry.
Yeah. I got you, George. I understand that. Yeah. So George just brought up another tip of not oiling too early because the smell. You can get that burnt oil smell. So this one, we're going to start the painting process right now. As you guys can see, I just realized I did not get my nails cleaned from sharpening my knives, but we're going to start with just the prep. So when you're working with milk paint dries in a little bit of a textured finish. So it's a little chalky, a little chunky. We'll talk about mixing techniques to try and get as smooth of an application as you can. But this is not the finished stage. When you have your milk paint applied, a few layers or a single layer wiped off if you want that stained effect, you're still going to want to burnish it or sand it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But because you're doing action to the paint, you're going to create paint powder. And so you want to be able to protect the rest of your wood. If you don't want a straight line across your paint, that's fine. You can leave the tape off. But just be aware that as you're sanding it or as you're burnishing it, the pigment powder can kind of blend into the grain of your finished spoon. So I like clean lines on mine, so I do use tape. And then if you're just burnishing, so if you're going to be burnishing versus that farmhouse style of sanding where you really want the wood to show through on your facets, I just tape and I leave the bowl bare because it's fine. Burnishing will create a little bit of, residue from the paint, but not much. If you're planning on sanding and it's the first time you're doing this, I would recommend using a plastic bag or a paper bag and actually trapping in the wood that you don't want impacted. Because if you are sanding this, it's going to create a lot of pigment powder. And if that gets into, especially the end grain on the inside of a bowl, it's really hard to get off. Some of it'll wipe off nicely, but if it gets into the grain of the wood, you can end up with a less clean appearance than you want to have. But by all means, you can practice on I've taken tape and angled it up the spoon. So it was kind of a half and half split. I've done the sides of spoons. You can play around with the tape as a design element. For right now, I'm just going to mask off these two little ones as a way to just protect the wood and create a little bit of a straight line. And what I do is I apply it to where I've got a nice straight line on the top. As I pinch it around, because this is not a flat and square object, you'll notice that it comes to a point. And that point can be a part of your design aesthetic. If you center it really well, you can have a nice little paint V here. But if you don't want that, you can just simply take a second piece of tape. And I use painter's tape. You can use masking tape. Just don't use something that's going to really stick or adhere because you want it to come off later on. And then I'll look here on the side profile where it starts to angle, and I'll kind of put that in, and then I'll just go straight across the back. And that provides a nice little collar around the spoon. So I'm going to do another spoon. And while I'm doing that, if there's anyone with tips and tricks on taping their spoons, any questions, anything that's worked for you, please share that as well. Cool. And then I'm going to do one kind of farmhouse style one. So let me grab something to throw around here. So, what's this one? And then picking your colors, that's completely an aesthetic choice. You get to kind of do however you want. I like to have a variety of colors. I like to play around with super bright colors. Sometimes I'll choose a more muted tone. This one's called Paprika, and it's a really, I don't think it's an actual paprika color, but it's more of like a lovely dark rose color. And then I'll even use some kind of slate grays sometimes, or black if I am not ebonizing a spoon. So it's whatever your aesthetic looks like. And then some of them you'll see, because I'm doing this paint collar, that there will be raw wood after the bowl transition and then the handle's painted. And then other ones you can paint directly up to that bowl transition. So this one's got kind of the dippy bowl effect. And then I painted directly up to that. So I didn't need to tape this one because I was able to control that line really well. In this spoon, I'm only burnishing. I'm not sanding, so I'm not worried about getting this bowl full of that paint dust. Cool. So now we can get started. These ones all have 2 applications of paint on them. So we're going to use these a little bit later to show you some burnishing and sanding techniques. And then I'll just start to paint these couple here that we left blank. Anyone else who is a milk paint enthusiast or someone who's done milk paint often, please, I'm going to talk a little bit about my mixing process, but I'd love to hear yours as well, just to again, build out some fun knowledge base and tips and tricks. So milk paint, again, starts out as a pigment powder in the, oh, that's going to be hard to see better. The Kaylyn, there we go. Look at that. Okay. Kind of. Anyways, it's all pigment powder. So it's just little powder bits here. And it's that milk Kaylyn, the lime, the pigment powder. These ones come pre-mixed. And then on the outside of the bottle, it's going to say, like, essentially to mix it on a 1-on-1 ratio. So it's like 2 tablespoons of powder to 2 tablespoons of water. I find that a little bit chunky for mixing. And so what I end up doing is I do kind of a 2 parts water to 1 part pigment versus a 1-on-1. So like double the water of the pigment. And that I find gives you a really nice consistency of paint that you can brush on easily. It's not as chunky, and it applies really nicely to the spoons. It is a little thinner than that 1-to-1 ratio. So I do 2 coats of paint on my spoon handles. And then if it's a really difficult adhering because of some problem, I may do 3 coats, but 2 coats is usually enough. I'll mix one from scratch here in a minute, but I just wanted to show that when you're mixing up this milk paint, you can also get some bubbling. And so what I like to do is I like to mix it really vigorously and then set it aside for 20 minutes and come back and mix it again. And then you may need to do that one more time because it'll get a little foamy, and just revisiting it and letting all of that settle can help get a smoother paint finish. Milk paint also sells it's essentially a little bit of soap that you put in there, and it breaks all the bubbles and smooths it out. And that I've found for some pigments is critical. The red paint foams like crazy. Like the paint just doesn't want to go in the water, and it essentially boils to the top, and it's impossible to mix. And so getting a anti-foaming agent can be really nice. It's food safe, etc. But for a lot of the colors, I don't need that because it might foam a little bit, but within like 20, 30 minutes, that foam will go down and the paint, you can apply it really easily. Anyone else have ratios that they like? If you're looking at doing more of a Dan Lawrence style staining, you'll want to make it even thinner, and then you'll wipe it off as you paint it to get just that staining effect, rather than a painted coat effect.
So Kaylyn, while you're doing that, the great thing about real milk paint is they sell those small sample sizes and you can try out a lot of different colors without spending a lot of money. Do you use just enough paint for one session? Because what I've been doing with mine is I've been mixing the whole thing and then putting it in a container and sticking it in the fridge, which I understand isn't a great idea because, you know, that protein can spoil over time if you don't use it. So I haven't had a problem with that. I just remix it when I reuse it. But I was just curious what others have been doing.
That's a great question. So I usually try and just mix enough for the spoons I'm painting in the session I'm painting, because I'm a little worried of that same situation. So one of the things I've noticed is when I'm storing it in the fridge is then the pigments sometimes separate out again, and it gets a little of a chalky consistency. So you definitely have to remix it to make sure that it's a good consistency. I've had luck keeping milk paint well in the fridge for like 3-4 days, maybe 3, but anything over 3, it gets like really weird. Like some of it'll dry, some of it'll separate.
Oh, yeah.
You can remix it, but I try and use it up as often as I can, which is a little hard if you're only doing a few spoon handles at a time, because you don't need much at all. Like these again could last you several bowls or like 30 spoons. So if you're looking at just doing one spoon handle rather than using like 1/8 of a teaspoon to measure it, I actually just pick up the pigment on the end of a paintbrush, drop that into a little thing, mix it around, and that's about as much paint as I need. Because you really don't need a ton to get this coverage, but you can keep it in the fridge for a few days. But after those few days, I would say it's a pretty mixed bag of what the result's going to be.
Yep, that's
great.
Yeah, don't do
I
it.
have something to share about that.
Sure. Yep.
What I do is I kind of keep a rolling little tray with my current milk paint that I'm using, and as I use it up, I just add new colors. I don't bother washing it too often. But what I've found to be the case in my climate is I mix up a small amount of it at a time, and I tend to use a very watery ratio because I like to see the quite translucent kind of milk paint finish on my spoons.
Yeah, that's a good point, Julian, because if it goes on, and I've had this issue too, if it goes on too thick, it can be very problematic.
Yeah, and you can always add more coats if you want more.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
But the point is that when I'm done and I've got a little bit left out, I just leave it somewhere sunny for that water to evaporate, turns it back into powder, and I can just mix it up again.
Yeah, that's great.
That's similar to what I do, Julian. I have one of those little trays of paint containers, little plastic trays, and I only mix a small amount as well. I buy the sample bags from Miss Mustard Seed, and I use it very thin, and then I let it dry out, and then I can just put a little bit more water in that little container later on and stir it up. So I have all the colors along the, in that one little plastic, I don't know, they're kids paint, little plastic for acrylic paints. And then just, remix them after, because it's quite expensive. So it's nice to let it evaporate, and then I can just add water again and remix it.
That's a great point, Paul. Thanks so much. And also good to see you. Thanks so much for hopping on.
Yeah.
And that's an excellent tip. And then kind of as Julian mentioned, this plum color is a little thinner. It's not quite as thin as a wash I would normally do. But if you paint it on and before it starts to dry, if you come and like have really confident from end to end sweeping strokes, you can bring off some of that top layer of the paint, and then you'll get that stain. and you'll still be able to see that wood grain pattern right there. You can see the growth rings here. And so this one, I'm just going to leave as that single really thin layer to keep that wood, to bring out the beauty of the wood.
Yeah.
And we'll do a second coat on this one later on, just to have some variety. And then one of the things too, if you have maker's marks, so this is a little K that I do for my maker's mark. It's just a line and 2 triangles. Or if you have chips right here, if you're applying the paint liberally and you're going across those chip marks, it'll fill them up as small voids. And so as I was painting, you may have seen me, when you want to paint, you want confident strokes, because milk paint gets a little temperamental. If you apply it and then you try and paint over what's been applied, it can pull itself away from the wood. And so when you're building that base coat, you want those nice, long, confident strokes from kind of the paint, tapers paint, you know what I mean, all the way to the end. And then after you've done that application, you can come back around and find those little grooves and just really gently with a paintbrush kind of brush out those grooves, and then even dry out your paintbrush a little bit, get the excess paint off and moisture off, and then just come through to make sure those chips are not filled in, because you want to retain the depth so that you retain the light and shadow reaction that chip carving brings to you for those really lovely patterns.
Great.
So you'll want to do that on your chips, and then you'll also want to do it on your maker's mark, because if you don't, they get a bit chalky and they're hard. You can clean them out, but they're hard to clean out. So just come through here with a dry brush after that paint's been applied and clean out those chip marks.
If anyone has tried carving after the painting.
Oh, I have. We're going to do that today. Yep. It's so that's one example that I have from my Christmas spoons last year. So last year for my family members, I did a blue paint base, let it go, and then chip carved through to make snowflakes.
Yeah.
So you've got snowflakes coming through, and this was before I knew how to do milk paint well. And so I just chip carved it before oiling it, and then some of the pigment powder fell into the snowflakes. So they're a little blue, but we'll talk about kind of what I've found as good tips on how to get these to be really clean, or we can actually talk about that now.
The one risk for that is the grit in the paint can really.
Oh yeah, you need a dedicated chip knife. Yeah, you need a throwaway chip knife. So if you have a chip knife that might have a like a chip carving knife that might just be like ready for retirement, don't retire it. Use it for your milk paint, because this will dull the edge pretty because of that lime and the pigment powders. It will dull the edge quite a bit, but what you can do on a solid piece of wood is once you have the wood solid, you can oil it and then do an oven cure and then chip through that oven cured oil. And because the paint has been cured with oil, it's less likely to powder into the void. So you'll get cleaner lines. And I like to do, I do these blue ones and white handles with snowflakes, which are really fun. And then I do a lot of blue and teal handles with fish chip carved in them for little kid spoons. So that's kind of a neat way to have little white or tan fish swimming through your water. So you can get creative there. But I do recommend oven curing over the paint at least one round before you chip through, because otherwise if you're chipping through this chalky paint, some of that powder will fall into your chips and then it's impossible to get it out. Still looks good, but it could be cleaner. So we'll talk about that again.
The milk paint itself cures as well. And then maybe
milk paint cures.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. So you would leave it dry for 2 days to let the milk paint kind of sit and cure, and then burnish it, oil it, oven cure it, and then do these little snowflake patterns would be my course of action, or recommended course of action for sure.
You can also do the inverse where you chip carve your handle, then paint into those little chips and then burnish off the rest. So like wipe off the rest. So you'll get a stain over the rest of the handle, but you'll get a concentration of paint inside the chips.
Yep. So we've got an example here. This one had some nasty tear out. So I tried to turn it into some kind of flame-like chips. So then I painted those chips red and burnished it. So there's still a slight red stain here, but then those chips really pop with the dark red within each of those chips. So that's a great tip.
I really like that effect. I don't think I've seen that before. That looks awesome.
Yeah, it's nice.
I can't take this one 100% myself. Sean Warburton paints a lot in his chips. I think he uses watercolor.
Oh, what a surprise. What a surprise, Kaylyn. You're not going to take the compliment? You're going to deflect it to someone else?
Hey, Kevin.
I really like even the way it bleeds over a little adds to it. I think it's really cool.
Yeah,
and I think it's I think it's specifically your execution that I like, Kaylyn.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Sean can't take credit for that.
Yeah. But it is fun to kind of add just like pops of color like that. So I think when people think about milk paint, they're like, oh my gosh, you're going to paint the whole spoon. It doesn't look like wood anymore. Why would you bother doing that? Natural wood is beautiful, whatever. But you can do some really cool things. You can do color pops. You can chip carve through to bring out the wood back through snowflakes. You can just do the stains where you still have that wood grain, even though you have color. And so you can kind of bring some variety into your process. And then again, this is just a nice way to save a spoon that had some just like very ugly tear out. Like there were 3 huge tear out chunks. And then instead of throwing this in the bin or in the fire, I just chip carved little flame marks and then painted those in and burnished the paint away. That looks a little better. There you go.
I agree with Ken. It looks really nice.
So these.
One thing I wanted to mention, you were talking about mixing the milk paint thin or thicker.
Yes.
I did find I get a lot of, I mix mine usually very thin, and I do get some run out under the tape. I've had that problem. So I've actually had to mix it a little bit thicker as of lately, because I'll find that I usually do, like I'll do a thin mix. I'll do a coat of milk paint. I have a little fan in my shop, and I'll hang my spoons in front of the fan, and it dries, in 20 minutes or so, and then I'll put another coat on. And I find with those thin coats, it does leak under the tape. So if you want that really solid line, you might want to mix a little thicker.
Another thing for drying is a hair dryer. I've used a hair dryer to dry coats.
I've used a blowtorch, and I've found that can be interesting.
Whoa, that's cool. Those are excellent tips. The thin paint running under the tape, I've had that problem too. What I do when I'm gonna use like thin runny paint is I'll tend to go with a design where the wood is not baked, so that I can actually just like carve the paint back to then bring back a really nice edge of the spoon. But if you've baked your spoon and then you carve that off, the baked color will come off. So you kind of pre-plan that. But that's a good call out. So here are a couple options. This one again is kind of that example where I'm not mixing a lot, because the only thing I'm doing is this spoon had a bad crack in it, and rather than throwing it in the fire bin, I just cut that crack out. And then it has a knot in here that I thought looked like an olive. So I chip carved the word olives into it. So now it's an olive spoon that has a perfect draining strain. So all I want to do is paint the letters in green. So we're going to do that a little bit. So we need almost nothing. So I just used my paintbrush, grab a little bit of pigment and put it in there. And then with milk paint too, it comes in dozens of colors, but every once in a while that color is not exactly what you want. And so here I've got kind of a dark forest green, a little bit of yellow, and then some white to try and get more of an olivey color, because I don't own that. You can mix different milk paint pigments together to make your own colors. And then another one that I mix a lot that you'll see on my spoons is more of kind of a goldenrod color. and they don't have that. They have a very bright yellow. They have kind of a mustard yellow, and then they have an orange. So what I'll do is I'll just take the bright yellow here, and I'll kind of measure it out like this with the paintbrush. And then I only need a tiny bit of orange. So I actually just flip the paintbrush around, get like a little peak of orange there, and throw that in. And now these I can just add water to until I have that consistency that I like. So I'm going to mix these up with water. While I'm doing that, Ryan, Paul, anyone else, Peter, Julian, if you milk paint often, if you want to share some more tips and tricks, you're welcome to do that. And then here I'm just going to pick up about this. George?
I have a question. Is there a colorless milk paint? Because
Yes.
so can you get the material of the paint without pigments? Because when you painting a wall and you do the tape thingy and you want to have a colored wall and you want to have a white edge, you do you put this tape on the wall, and then your first thing is you color the edge of the tape with the white, what's under the tape, and then you add the color. So if you want to prevent the milk paint to go under your tape, you could use maybe a colorless milk paint to fill these little spots, and then you can do the coloring. Does anyone understand what I mean?
I do. You could do kind of a barrier of the one milk paint. And they do sell just the base, so the milk paint base, and then they'll sell pigments, so you can make your own milk paint from scratch. And I think most of the companies do that. I think Miss Mustard Seed, I don't know, Julian, if the one in Australia you posted about has that or not.
I typically buy their colors through a different website that sort of does their own little tins. But what I was going to say is, if you want to stop bleed through your tape, in my experience, just buy better tape.
Sure.
Seriously, go to the painting store and buy the most expensive tape, and it will work like twice as well at stopping that penetration.
Yeah, high quality blue painter's tape is right. I mean, I've never had an issue with bleed myself, and I'm by no means an expert at this.
Use this.
You'd be surprised, like a high quality blue painter's tape can actually be quite expensive.
You can get this frog tape stuff in the UK, which comes in a green and yellow. Green's tacky, but not very good. But the yellow is really good. It's got a lot more tack, but you can peel it off really easily.
Also, if anyone wants to follow along, this is my technique. It's really just getting your blowtorch at like a far enough distance that you're not going to burn the wood, and it will dry instantly.
Heat gun works really well as well.
Adam Savage makes a little. Adam Savage takes a little cardboard. I've seen Adam Savage takes a little cardboard box and punches a hole in it and hangs a hairdryer in it and makes like a hot box on the spot for drying things quickly. Always seem clever to me. And they the tape thing for sure, man. I used to paint houses, and I still like painting internal walls of houses, and the different tape makes all the difference. It also, you can remove it cleanly for much longer, so you can leave it on there multiple days and then it still peels off nicely, the more expensive tape.
I think part of
in Germany the tapes have different colors to how long you want to stick it to the wall. So you have like 12-hour tape, you have 24-hour tape, or you have like 3 days tape or something like that. So you can get tapes for different timing you want to stick it to the wall and before you get it off. And yes, good tape can help you, but if you want to really have a perfect, I think every painter is like painting the edge of the tape once with what's underneath.
One of the things that I've also, I don't know if this is scientifically or tool accurate, but when I do tape mine with like more of the blues painter's tape works a little bit, but more of like the yellow masking tape works. If you like build up some friction by just rubbing it into the spoon a little bit, I think the adhesion warms up and then works a little better. But I also have paint running very often. And so I just go and clean up those edges with
The other
knife.
thing you can do
I've never-
to improve your odds is to not paint into the tape. Paint your brush
Yeah,
should go from the tape into the spoon, and that way you reduce that risk as well.
that's a great tip.
So I've never worked with milk paint. Is there no chance just to cut a clean line if you try to work without tape? Is it too runny?
It is chunky and chalky, and then you tend to burnish it and or sand it. And so then the little pigment powders tend to give you a blurry line. But I've also done the blurry line with no problem. That's just when, like, if I don't want a crisp edge, but a blurry line adds to whatever artistic aesthetic I'm trying to do, or laziness, to be quite honest, because sometimes my decorating comes from that. That's fine then.
Another thing that I like to do that I'm not sure if you mentioned or not, Kaylyn, is to tip off my paint as it dries. So I noticed that you've been using quite small brushes, but I'll use quite a large brush compared to the size of the spoon that I'm painting, like just a paint style brush. Not a particularly good one, just a cheap one. But I can tip this off along the grain as it dries, brush out any imperfections and get a texture that aligns very closely with the grain.
Okay.
So I noticed Tamir was commenting about having a problem with visible brush strokes.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
And
Yeah,
yeah.
That's a really good one, Julian. And Tamir, that's something that I've had problems with, and working on your paint consistency can help. And then really that, as I mentioned before, when you're putting on the paint first time you touch the wood, you really want to go, like, don't start your paintbrush here and paint out, start on the tape, paint from the tape and out, and that'll make brush stroke a bit more confident, clean, and then do that just one time over each of these areas. If you come back and do the little ones, once it's been on the wood for a minute, it'll pull itself away from each other. And then you'll end up with brush strokes all over that are really hard to get out. And then if you do end up with kind of a brush strokey first coat, you can actually just take a paper bag and really burnish it and kind of rub it off. And then on your second coat, try and, cover those spots. And that can work as well. But just starting from the tape and doing one paint stroke. Larger brushes are probably helpful. I just use like whatever paint brushes I had around the house for other crafting. One thing I have noticed that I'll just kind of tell you all, because it's happening on the call right now, is use paintbrushes, or at least my opinion, and this can be up to debate, but I find synthetic bristles don't gum up as much as natural bristles. Like I have some watercolor paint brushes that I use occasionally. And these ones, for some reason, the milk just feels like it's attracted to these bristles, and it like just won't come off the bristles. And then it also actually eventually just kind of takes the bristles away from your brush. So then I like using these for like my watercolor painting, but for milk paint, I've found the synthetic, the paint tends to come off the bristles easier and onto the spoon. I don't know if anyone else has had that experience or if that's just kind of a me thing.
No, it happens to me all the time. It's annoying.
Yeah, super annoying, really frustrating if you also get a bristle in your paint on your spoon, because then it's hard to get out. While I'm painting here, would someone mind hopping into the chat, just because I don't have free hands, and reading out any questions that have been asked and have not been answered yet?
Tamir had a question about visible brush strokes.
Okay.
He's thinking it's too thick.
Yep.
He's tried foam brushes. I don't know if a foam brush will help there myself.
I've tried foam brushes. I prefer bristles, and it's a lot of the thickness of the paint. Like if I do the recommended mixing ratio of like the 1:1, I feel like it's so chunky, and then those chunks drag with the milk, with the bristles, and leave a really streaky finish. So that's why I've done more of that 2:1 ratio. So it's not quote unquote thin, but it's thinner and it applies better. And then also, as I was mentioning earlier, when you're mixing, some of them you'll want to mix, and then if they're foamy, put them aside, remix, because if they're foamy, they also tend to streak, and the foam makes the brush strokes look much more apparent. And so the red paint, again, I'll like mix it, set it aside for 20 minutes, mix it, set it aside for 20 minutes. This green and this yellow don't foam very much. That's why I chose them to do on this call, just because I knew it would be decently effective. But the foaming can make the brush strokes more apparent, and the chunkiness can make the brush strokes more apparent, or tentative application, which I've done for a long time as well. So here we've got our olives milk painted in there. And then I'm just applying that really thinly so that I don't need to go and clean these out as I did when I did the thicker application. Like it's in there, it's nice, it'll work well. Any other questions?
I wanted
Yeah.
to share the ones that I've been working on while we've been chatting.
Sure.
Because I've used a very thin paint layer. I mean, a very thin consistency of paint. Sorry, let me just try and get it so you can actually see. But I've got a totally crisp edge just because of the tape, and I'm absolutely convinced that that's the reason.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. And then here, when you're initially going over, if you're doing kind of light strokes, you'll just want to like tap into each of the chips that you're carving to make sure that paint gets in there. So this one, I'm not doing as thick of a coverage. So I'm just going into each of those chips after doing those confident single line coverage strokes.
While you're doing that, I'll mention one of the pitfalls that I found while I've is I will sometimes put it on too thick and then I'll get cracking in the paint.
Oh,
after it's dry.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone else has experienced that. I mean, it's easy enough to just remove it and then try again, but that could be because of the paint that I've had stored too long or whatever. But that's a risk. It's usually if you put too many coats on too soon, it'll tend to do that.
Yeah, too many coats too soon.
Milk paint people are using? I just wanted to ask what types of milk paint people are using, whether it's Real Milk Paint Co. or Miss Mustard Seed or anything like that. Or I use the Miss Mustard Seed and I haven't had problems with like brush strokes or cracking, regardless of how thick I mix it or not. So I'm just wondering, could some of the problems be the brand of milk paint?
I would,
just out of curiosity.
In my case, I would say it was me. I think that it's not the paint so much as the way I mixed it and applied it. Yeah, that's just me. I use
personally,
Miss Kaylyn.
I've only ever used Real Milk Paint Co. and never had problems. I think it's great stuff. And I love the little sample size, like Kaylyn was saying. It's perfect to order a bunch of different colors and play around. I really like it.
Yeah, they make a nice product.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to use Miss Mustard Seeds yet. I think they've got some really cool colors that Real Milk Paint doesn't have. So I would love to use Miss Mustard Seed. They have some really nice kind of like this golden one that I'm making up. They have that one available. So I think it would be fun to try. The Real Milk Paint, I think it's more of the, are you applying it right? So kind of as Peter was saying, that sounds like it was way too thick, got cakey, cracked while drying. And then the other problem, if you put it on too thick, is if it doesn't cure appropriately before you oil it, it will just smudge everywhere. I put up a photo on the Instagram of me holding like a little paper towel that just looked like I had just rubbed fresh paint on it. And that was because those spoons, I had put too thick of coats on. I tried to finish them within a day because I was rushing for Christmas, and then it just ended up being like a bit of a disaster. Kaylyn's Christmas horror story.
See, that's interesting, Kaylyn, because when I will sand back or burnish or whatever the milk paint, I always take a wet rag and wipe it off. I feel like that needs to be done, or else it spills over like crazy when I oil it. So I always wipe it off before I oil it.
I think maybe like now that I know what I'm doing or I'm doing it better, maybe that would be effective. But I touched a white towel to those blue handles originally, and the blue just like, it didn't come off all the way because it stained into the wood. But whatever I did in that situation, the paint did not cure. But I think if it's cured and you sand it and you do things, then like it should be fine, because those proteins should create some sort of a layer where like the paint is holding itself together. But if it doesn't cure for some reason, then like it is not waterproof. Like you have to approach it a little differently. That's only happened twice. It was those Christmas spoons, and then I had some red paint at one point that did that same smudgy smearing. I'm hoping these ones don't today, because that would be embarrassing if I'm leading a whole session, but also if it happens, maybe it's a troubleshooting opportunity. So here we've got our yellow. The one thing also with milk paint is some of these will dry a different color that they burnish and oil to. So it's good if you've got paint sticks, if it's a new color for you, to kind of look at the color samples when you purchase it. Because this one, once it's burnished, it'll get a bit more of that, like that orange will show up more when it burnishes and oils. And then this blue will get deeper as well. The blue, a lot of the lime comes up to the top of the blue. And so then it looks like it's got a chalky white coating, but that's actually just the lime at the surface that you'll be calming down once you burnish it and oil it. Any other questions on paint? If you've got a really beautiful template such as this and you don't need to paint the whole handle, you can just put a little color pop of a finial on there as well. So just other options. You all can probably recognize quite a few. This one's, we've got a Ryan spoon, we've got a Chuck number 7. We've got a number 8 here for Mike. These ones are kind of modified orange because I had very weird wood shapes. We've got Jeff Ryett here as well, and the 26. So these are just kind of a fun way to play with more Rise Up templates. Cool. All right, next we're going to go to the distressing the wood and burnishing the wood. Any other paint questions before we move on to that topic?
Do you ever play around with a base coat and then top it with a different color and then burnish to bring out the...
I've done that a few times. This one right here's got the darker blue underneath the lighter blue, so we'll try and get that to work out today. I haven't done it as much as I should, because some people, Dave the Bodger, he does the lava spoons, I think he calls them, which he does the red under black, black under red, one of those two ways. And those look awesome. And I think it's fun to where maybe if you're a newer carver and you're not getting super flat facets, but you're getting little chips to make your handles, because we just chip away as newer carvers. I think that can actually be really cool if you have a lot of texture and a lot of like rotating facets. Yeah. If you have 2 layers of milk paint and then bring that out, because if you're doing 2 layers of milk paint on something like this, it won't pop as much as you would if it was like, oh, I've got.
Yeah, the textures. Yeah, you're absolutely right. If you've ever seen John Mulaney's work, yeah, I think he blow torches his to get the dark color underneath, and then he paints and he burnishes, and it brings out the black from the torching. But it's the same basic idea. He's got a base color, and then he puts the paint on, and it's so textured, and then when he burnishes it, it brings it all out.
Yeah, and this is one that I did with this isn't 2 tones, it's just navy, but this is one where I tried to leave additional texture on my kuksa on the bottom, so that when I distressed it, it came out and looked almost like a marbled or a stone effect. And then this one I did not use tape on. So you'll see here in that end grain, there's some like navy blue bleeding into the end grain because I didn't put blue tape on it. And then as the powder came from sanding it, it went into the end grain and it's now there forever. So this one's kind of a deliberately textured bowl painted, and then this one is a textured bowl but burnished. So rather than sanding it to where you can see the actual wood through it, it's just burnished. And so you don't see the wood through it as much. There's some mistakes, but mostly it's a solid, consistent color as well.
I've tried the two-tone on quite a few different spoons, and I haven't figured out the process quite yet. I might not be letting the first coat dry long enough. Or it's just really finicky because you're trying to burnish off this, top coat and leave the second coat before getting to the raw wood. So I just recommend people try it out and see what works for them. I'm using like a Scotch-Brite, one of those Scotch-Brite pads to burnish.
What color Scotch-Brite?
It's not actually, I got it at the hardware store. It's a green.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the issue. The green ones are more abrasive. And so if you're trying to sand it back, go with something finer, go with like a polishing one. The gray or the white is usually going to be finer.
Yeah, no, it is. I got it in the paint section of the hardware. It's not like a Scotch-Brite pad, but it has that, it's that, wiry sort of plastic material. I don't know.
It's the same. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, but I think that's the issue on that is that it's probably a higher abrasive than you want.
Yeah, it comes in different. Yeah, it's just like sand.
Well, it is and it isn't, because if I can burnish the spoon with it to a certain degree, and it just really shines up the milk paint nicely. But when I'm trying to get through that coat, sometimes it's just like 2 extra strokes and it's right through. But you're right, it's probably just too abrasive.
So if I'm trying to sand through different things like this John Mulaney mock or rip off that I did, that kind of stuff, I'll actually use a more abrasive thing, but use it lighter and more efficiently. Just try to like lightly do it, and it'll take the paint down through the layers. Whereas if I want to keep the color, like Kaylyn was saying, I would use a higher abrasive, like a finer abrasive, and more burnish it that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't have any Scotch-Brite pads, but thank you for bringing that up, because that's a super popular tool to use when doing these burnishing applications and sanding and distressing applications. So I also wanted to show that like this is the same color as well. And this one I did 3 coats and only burnished it because I wanted it to be as dark and thick as possible. And this one I just did 2 coats and then did that really distressing. So it even looks almost like a slightly, I guess it's not that much lighter, but you can see that the different distressing technique will give you a different outcome for your spoons or your bowls. And then you can choose to leave like plain rims or painted. And then this one, because I couldn't tape the inside well, I just left enough wood here to be able to like take one final pass with my Sloyd knife to get a really sharp line all the way around this little guac bowl that I made for.
That's beautiful. It's really nice.
So you can kind of play around. And then what we're going to be kind of looking at right now is sandpaper, which is for really that distressed farmhouse look. I don't love these. We'll talk about them, but I feel like it just gives you metal dust. That's terrible. But we'll talk about using steel wool, and then paper bags, which Peter, I think you might have told me to do this, maybe, and it's brilliant. I love it. And then an actual burnisher. So we'll kind of talk through 4 different distressing modalities. But again, please feel free to share any tips and tricks. I'm just trying to figure out which ones we want to distress in which way. So we'll do these 2 rough distressed, these 2 maybe burnished. This one is Scotch-Brite. And then again, the burnished color will come out a little bit different. So this is the same color, and this one has a little bit warmer in that orange tone. I have no idea why the orange never shows up when the paint is dry, but when you burnish it, it comes out and creates a really lovely, lovely goldenrod color.
So Kaylyn, is the one in your right hand, did you oil or wax that, or is that just the paint itself that you were able to burnish that beautiful sheen?
So this one has 1 coat of oil on it, but I don't think it looks that different from the burnishing. Like when we do burnishing on a couple of these, it really looks cool. Like, and the paint gets a really soft feeling. Like it no longer really feels like paint. And you won't even feel like the edge from the wood to the paint. It gets just a really lovely, lovely feeling. So burnishing's pretty fun. I like it. But this one does have a coat of oil. This is one of my, I brought some finished examples. I don't have a whole lot because anything I paint are usually intended as gifts. So they leave my house very quickly. They tend to go to people.
And how long do you typically wait after painting before you burnish?
For this demo, not long enough. So we're gonna hope that these work out just because I just got back from vacation. So these were painted the second coat yesterday. So I would typically wait 2 to 3 days to let it cure and really dry. Because even when you're doing multiple coats, when you paint this first layer of red on there, in 40 minutes, it's going to feel like you can paint a second coat on it because it's going to be dry to the touch. It'll have that chalky look. Milk paint, if you read the directions of the brand that you have, they all have kind of different recommendations, but they usually recommend at least 24 hours, if not 48 hours to like let it cure. And then between coats, I'll leave a whole day between coats. And then that again, like that's where I'll put the milk paint in the fridge. Not only do I have spoon blanks in the fridge, but I have milk paint in the fridge. Where do you have room for groceries? But
that's really interesting. I've never read the directions, obviously, because like I repaint it after like 40 minutes at best, maybe. And I think I let it dry for like 12 hours and then I'm just too anxious. I want to oil it. It's my favorite part of the whole thing. So like, yeah, I don't know.
So if it's read the directions. Well, no, if it's working for you, I think that's fantastic. I've just, I think I had my first milk paint experience was the smudgy, terrible Christmas. So I might have a little too much reservation on how I approach it. But if it works, man, time saving is amazing. So like folks can kind of test that out at their own, you know, go for it if you want to. I did reach out to Milk Paint once and they told me the smudging was because I went too soon and it didn't cure, but maybe that was, I may have also put it on way too thick. Like maybe that was where I really was heavy-handed in the application. So these two, we're gonna go farmhouse style. Thanks, Brendan. I can get you some photos for that Christmas book for sure. These ones we're gonna go farmhouse style. And as Ryan mentioned, rather than taking a really smooth sandpaper and working at this for like 40 minutes to try and bring out the wooden edges, I actually take something that's decently rough. So like a 400 or a 600, and I just use it really lightly and do kind of, again, confident passes. And this is gonna create that dust. So I'm putting down some stuff to try and protect the other wood, but just like really confident passes. And you can see that wood is already coming through. Maybe you can't see it, but I promise you it is. There you go. You can see that blonde line. And you don't want to do it too much because we still want to burnish this. And here's some of that paint coming off in a minute. But here's where I want to establish kind of that really rustic, really rough look. So I'm just going to take some of these passes over here and then just highlighting those edges on the facets. There we go. So now you can see kind of each of those facet lines. Maybe. Can you? There you go.
Yeah.
So those facet lines are showing up as raw wood. And so now I would probably stop at this stage because I'm not trying to finish the milk paint with this. I'm just trying to distress it heavily. So I'm just trying to get that wood to peek through in the paint itself. So I'm going to set that aside. And then here's again where you want to really watch your fingers, because this rough sanding will get a ton of that powder off. And that's why I've taped these two bowls up so that I don't get the pigment powder from my hands onto those bowls. And then I'll use a separate piece of sandpaper because I'm switching colors. and then start to do that same application. And here's where I'm gonna try and get that second blue to show up in some spots, and then try to get the wood to show up in other spots.
You're using 400 grit there?
I am, and it's just kind of what I had around. I'll use 600, 400, and then just light passes, because you don't want to take, unless you want to take almost everything off and have just like a little bit. It's up to you, but doesn't need a lot.
I usually use 220 for this process, and you got to go
nice.
super light. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Kaylyn, somebody popped in the chat and asked what specific color that red was.
Oh, let me check. Flag red.
Yeah,
and this red burnishes beautifully. George has a spoon that has this red handle on it that I sent to him. And I think it turned out pretty well, pretty successful. So now that you've got this here, you'll want to wipe off the dust a bit just to save your next piece of sandpaper. And then the next piece of sandpaper, for kind of a more of a burnishing effect, I hop straight up to like 3,000. So if you get those multi-packs, if you sharpen with sandpaper, you should have some that are really high. And then if you want to go crazy, that's where you could even get into like the 7,000s and such. I've never done a test where I've gone through all of those grits, but I'm not sure if anyone here has, and if you have a sandpaper grit that you like for the burnishing effect specifically. Anyone do that? And then because I'm burnishing here and it's such a smooth piece, that's where I'm kind of leaning it into the table a little bit to get a little more pressure, because that burnishing is going to happen from some of the friction. And then here I've got lots of little kind of weird facets at the end of the handle that are coming out nicely. I don't know if you can see that, but that darker blue is coming through really beautifully in that light blue.
What I find when you get into the really high grits, like 7,000 and above, I think that certain natural materials tend to work better for burnishing than just increasingly fine grit sandpaper.
I think that's fair.
So what I would do is just pick up some fine wood shavings off the floor and use those.
Nice.
Or use, it's like if you've ever done any pole lathe turning or any kind of turning, you can pick up your dry shavings and they will give a wonderful luster to your final finish if the surface is prepared.
Oh.
And that really just depends on how vigorously you can do it.
That is a great tip, Julian. Fine wood shavings, that sounds really cool to use. I don't use sandpaper much anymore. I think my first like half a dozen spoons I use sandpaper. I will still to get the farmhouse look, but then I tend to burnish with a paper bag. That's my favorite option. I think it gives a really nice result. So here we've got that darker blue. I don't have much wood showing through, but there's some little spots here and here. And then it's very rustic. Like this is the look we were going through for, like lots of lines, lots of texture. You could even take that sandpaper more and take off some of this more consistent light blue. But this is essentially ready for oiling now once we would take the tape off, and then we would do one final burnish on that raw edge of paint because that hasn't been kind of tamped down yet. So I'm going to do this one really quickly, or actually I might just put this one off to the side and we can move on to the next technique. Or do you guys want to see the red burnished? The boat. Go, Kaylyn, go. So we'll just
Didn't you say that you hadn't done the two-tone thing very much, and then you like do a perfect two-tone one for us right here on video?
I haven't. I think I've only done maybe one of them before. Thanks. It's the luck of the audience, all of you encouraging me, everyone watching, feeling really like a champion painter here.
I'm trying to find a link to the scouring pads I use. I think that's what they're called.
Yeah.
To burnish, because it's not as aggressive as sandpaper.
Yeah.
And it really, and if you do it really lightly and quickly, you get a really shiny sheen on your paint. It does.
Cool.
It does a really nice job. And I think it's just like a kitchen scouring pad. They're almost made out of like plastic. It's not a Scotch-Brite brand. I think it's a scouring pad. I'm trying to find it here.
Yeah, if you can find that and post it, those I know are super popular and have been really successful. And then when you're burnishing too, if you've got some texture on here, like these little notches, you'll want to try and get in there to burnish it, just to get that shine as well, because otherwise you don't have to burnish into chip marks, but if you've got some deliberate texture, you'll want to try and get those smooth as well, just to get as nice of a finish as you can. So this one's lightly burnished.
Are you talking about Scotch-Brite form?
It's not the Scotch-Brite brand. It's just like a scouring pad, like it's black.
It's all the same stuff, regardless of the brand. It's like a Mr. Clean
Yeah,
Magic
you
eraser
can
is
get
the
it
same
in-
thing as the generic. It's all the same thing. They just come in different grits.
Yeah.
In the jewelry supply, you can get these in different grids. So you can order like 1,000 grit, 400 grit, 600 grit, 200 grit, and stuff like that.
Yeah, they work really well. I find, and they don't create as much dust because a lot of the dust goes into the scouring pad itself. You do have to make sure you use, I buy a big sheet of it and I cut off little squares, use the same pad for the same colors because it does a nice job of also absorbing a lot of the dust that comes off when you're doing the burnishing.
Yeah, that's great because I hate paint dust. It's just a bit ridiculous. So here we've got, I'm going to keep moving on just so that we keep going, but here we've got kind of, you can see that shine now coming through with the burnished from that 3000 grit sandpaper. And then I would keep going just to get a consistent shine across. Oh, there we go. You want a consistent shine across the whole spoon, not just the raised edges. So earlier we were just taking off the raised edge color, but now we're trying to burnish and smooth that entire surface, including like little notches here. Don't worry about the chips, they'll be fine. But here's kind of our rustic. I'll get some photos up on Instagram. The Zoom's just not picking up the wood color and stuff. So next one is not Scotch-Brite, but steel wool. What you would do is you would get like a mixed bag and the same exact process with the sandpaper. Just because we're kind of going long in the day, I might not actually even do one of these because you get metal dust as you use the steel wool. Like the shavings will fall off and for me, it's just a mess. But if you do have these available in your house, that's really fine, like terrible soft, I think it's 00, is excellent for burnishing. It gives a beautiful surface. I just personally find it a bit too messy and I don't like metal shavings hanging out all around. So then the next one that we're going to do is just burnishing rather than the farmhouse style of removing the paint. And I can't remember if it was Peter or someone else on Rise Up recommended just using a paper bag because the fibers of the paper cause enough friction for the burnishing and getting that chalky milk paint to a smooth, but it's not enough to actually remove paint. So this is a good burnishing option if you just want to smooth out your handle, but you don't want that farmhouse style. Now, when you're starting to burnish, if your paint application wasn't even, sometimes it may chip off in a couple spots, even though you're not intending that farmhouse style. and you just got to work with that. You can repaint that spot, or you can just change the aesthetic more to that farmhouse style. But I'm gonna work on burnishing this. This one takes a fair bit of pressure, so you can really get in there with a thumb and paper bag. And then move the paper bag around a little bit.
Never used a paper bag. That's interesting.
I don't know what it is about it, but it gives a really, it's not a too high gloss shine. Like I'll use a porcelain burnisher here in a little bit, and that's, I think, a very high gloss shine that you can get to with like the 3000 grit sandpaper. This one doesn't do as high gloss. So for colors like this that are more like, this is a very subtle color. It's not a very bright or bold. So I don't want it super shiny. I want it to be smooth. I want it to have a nice texture, not the milky, chalky texture, but I don't need it to be a high gloss carve finish. And so this paper bag burnishes it really lovely, but then also allows it to have a softer finish, kind of like a luster versus a gloss. And so the paper bag is nice if you're using colors like this, or a gray, or kind of a dusty teal or something like that. It is a little harder on the hands because you have to do a bit of pressure, but it works out very successfully. And this one, you'll get a little bit of wood through the ridges because again, it is taking a tiny bit off. So you might see some itty bitty wood marks on here, but it's not going to be the same as the farmhouse style. So this is kind of what that's looking like. A nice subtle luster gloss finish for this kind of dusty rose colored spoon handle. Okay, and then I'm going to do one last one, and then we'll throw some oil on these, and then we can kind of do a Q&A. I'll still be painting most of the morning if you guys want to hang out. This is like your Emmett Van Dryst porcelain burnisher. You can use really anything. If you're using a solid burnisher on the spoon, a light touch is pretty critical, because if you do any heavy touch, it'll crack it off into that farmhouse style, because it will take it off just based on the pressure. But this one, you barely have to touch the spoon, and you just kind of rub it on gently and nice. And then this one, this blue kind of turns more into a regular blue instead of the whitish blue. So you'll start seeing that blue color come through. And this one I like for awkwardly shaped spoons. Like this one has a dish cut into it, because then you can use that fine point to really get into each area of the spoon versus kind of an overall coverage of the burnish technique. And again, I'm being really careful with kind of a light pressure to get a burnish, but not removing the paint. And then one of the things, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, this milk paint was a little bubbly. So there are some little dots on here. As you burnish those dots can either burnish down nicely or they can chip off. But these ones are burnishing down really nicely. And this paint, those little dots were just caused because it was a little too foamy. Like I used it when it was still a little bit foamy. I should have mixed it a bit better. And then for those of you who have never held a milk paint spoon, it's pretty cool. Like once you get them burnished, they are very soft. Like it's a really nice texture in your hand. And so for eating spoons, I just find them really cool to eat with. Like they feel good in the hand. They feel really neat. And then cooking spoons as well. So a lot of my spoons, I do kind of like this, and I'll chip carve a person's name into it. and give them out as gifts to make them personal and get them excited about using wooden spoons. And then this burnisher is really nice because for like a circular pattern here, you just kind of spin it in circles and that burnishing comes in quite well.
I hope you're getting a kickback from Emmett.
Yeah, maybe a free burnisher. I dropped my other one and it cracked when it hit the floor, so I had to buy a second one. I just like them because out in Washington we have some smooth river pebbles, but not like you would in like an actual beach town. So a lot of my pebbles are just a bit rough for wood burnishing. So this one has just a really lovely shine, like it's almost a mirror shine from that burnishing coming through within the bowl of that, and just silky, silky, silky smooth. So that's kind of burnishing with that burnisher. And then the flip side is this chalkiness. So here's the unburnished space on this spoon. That's what milk paint looks like. And then you flip it over and it's got that really, really nice luster for the finish.
What kind of curing time are you aiming for before you will start a burnishing process like this?
2 days. Yeah,
2 days.
like 2 days usually. I do a lot of my stuff on the weekends, so like I'll paint maybe Thursday night, and then I'll do my burnishing on Sunday or something like that, you know. Just.
And, do you have an opinion if you were going to use your just like your kitchen oven to accelerate the milk paint curing?
Yep.
How long do you think that would take in comparison?
Yeah, so I've never used it for the milk paint. I've only done it for oil curing, but I think I would probably use it. I would even likely just throw the spoons in the oven with the oven light on overnight. And I think that would cure the milk paint really well, or even like an afternoon with the light on. I think that would work just fine. Yeah, I oven cure all my oils. I don't know why I don't do that with paint. But then like Ryan said, throw the rule book out the window. Don't read the rules and just do whatever works.
Yeah.
And that's awesome as well.
Ryan doesn't.
I'm typically very impatient with my milk paint, so I will apply it, burnish it, oil it all in the same afternoon. And I just use different kinds of tricks to help me get there.
Yep.
And I feel like that's actually just fine. You just have to accept that you're going to get a bit of not quite fully cured paint that's just going to come off. But you will get down to a good, solid, adhered paint layer, and that you can work with.
Here we've got the fully burnished spoon. When you take the tape off, one thing to remember is that the edge of the paint that was touching the tape is going to be raised a little bit because you're painting off of the tape onto the spoon. So some extra paint may have pooled there, or you might also get some of that seeping like Paul mentioned if it's a little thin. So you'll want to first clean up the edge. So if you need to bring a knife in here and clean that up, you can do that. And then you'll see just a really fine raised edge where that paint is. And so what I do is I just bring that down, and with the burnisher, I just burnish that little edge, being really carefully to go across versus up and down, because I don't want to drag anything into that raw wood. And so I'll just do that really gently and call that good. And then I'm going to hop in and oil this, and we'll talk about oven curing for oil. So we're not going to get into an oil ranking thing, but with milk paint, it needs a cured oil to penetrate through the paint, curing it to like give it more durability and longevity, and waterproofness. So you'll want a curing oil. Whatever you already use for your spoons will work well, whether that's like a walnut oil, linseed for those of you who do linseed, and then with real milk paint, they recommend the hemp oil because it won't change the color much. It's a lighter curing color. And then half and half is tung oil with a citrus solvent. These two are thin enough to seep through the paint. You don't want to seep it through the whole spoon because again, we're going to oven cure and that will bubble back up. You need to at least get it through and into the paint so that it cures together. They all hold hands. They're going to stay as a group. The pure tung oil I'll use as like a top coat sometimes, but it's not great for your first coat always. If it doesn't penetrate that paint. Again, if your paint is cured well, et cetera, you don't have to worry about this as much, but these will seep into the paint nicely, cure with the paint. This one will sit a bit more on top of it. But man, this gives a really nice waterproof finish. So a lot of times I'll do like a coat of this and then, or whatever mix I want to do. I'm smart enough to bring down a rag. No, I was not. So we're just gonna throw some oil on and then talk about the curing process. And if any of you are wondering, like, why does Kaylyn like this versus linseed oil? It's just what I had. Like, parts of my process are about laziness and access and the fact that I only have to pay shipping once versus like multiple times. Here we go.
Brendan asked a question about the weight of the paper you're using, Kaylyn.
Yep.
I like to use the paper that comes when you border something, and it's just regular brown paper.
Yeah.
It's used, lunch bag stuff. Yeah, that'll work.
Yep.
Grocery bag.
So you can use a paper bag, like a grocery bag, for getting kind of some soft ridges. And then this is just anytime I get packages, as Peter said, like any packing paper that's a little thinner, is nice to get a little, shinier finish. So you can kind of play around. And then I'm always a huge person on like repurposing as much packing materials as we humanly can, just because, I don't know, environment and being as closed cycle as you can be. So it's nice just to use up your packing materials in your shopping bags and give it a second life. So here, this one's not very good. I usually use like a paper towel. Or a rag. I did not bring them down with me. And then here's your nice oil oohs and ahs. So this one again is this one's I think it's called Faded Denim is the color. So it's a blue jeans color, and then it has a little bit of lightness into it. So it's there are some of their milk paints that are a solid color, and then some they make to look a little bit more diversified, like you'll get different tones and shades within one color. And this one is that. And then you can't really see it online, but you can still see the grain in the bowl or in the bowl of the handle. It's not just solid there. Maybe you can see the wood grain a little bit. So it's not solid paint, but really good paint coverage for a bright, bold color. And you can still see the wood grain to like get excited about the spoon. So that's that. This one's that paprika color, so it'll get a little bit more cinnamon-y here. So the lightness on it is that lime coming to the surface of the paint, and so that's where when you're putting oil on, it darkens up a little bit more because it's no longer dry. I don't know much more about the science of it. And then the one thing you would check is your paper towel. These are cured well because none of them are smudging onto the paper. If you're applying oil and you pick it up and you end with a blue paper towel or a blue rag, that's where you know that something went wrong in the curing process and it needs more time. So hopefully, like if you've done a batch of spoons, you can let the other ones rest. If you've only done that spoon, you can still go through the oven curing process. We'll just talk a little bit about how to get that to stabilize. It just takes a little bit longer, but if you get smudginess here, that's where you'll know problem A. And then what I've been doing here about touching the oil in the bowl, don't do that. You want to have like a really nice, smooth oil application. There were a couple of spoons that I sent out to my brother, and when he used them and washed them, water on the handle caused like white water spots to show up on top of the paint. And I contacted Real Milk Paint to understand what was going on. And it's because I handled the spoon too much and I took some of the oil off. And then that lime was like resurfacing on top of the cured paint because there wasn't enough oil coverage on it because I kept taking the oil off with my fingerprints. So you want a really nice thin layer. You don't want it to be thick because again, we're going to be oven curing these, but a nice thin, consistent layer without your fingerprints. Any questions on that? So here are my two. My oven curing process. So what I would do now that these two are done and oiled, make sure your tape's off and burnished, is I then oven cure. So earlier we talked about oven roasting, oven baking. This is not baking a spoon. This is not getting color onto the spoon. This is just expedite your oil curing process. So like when I look at hemp oil and this half and half, I think they say a 7-day cure, but a 30-day hard cure. Like it takes a long time for spoons and oil to cure. To speed that up, you can use your oven. And I did check with Real Milk Paint. They're like, yes, this works. So my process is I'll take this oiled spoon, I'll put parchment paper down on a cookie sheet and I'll put it on the cookie sheet and I'll fill the whole cookie sheet up with spoons. So I'll get a solid cookie sheet of spoons. I then set the oven to 170 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the lowest temperature my oven can go. So 170 is as low as I can get it. I use 170. I will put that cookie sheet into the oven with the spoons on it and set a timer for like 5 minutes to 10 minutes. At 5 minutes, take your spoons out and check them. And if it still looks smooth like this, that's great. But you may see oil bubbling to the top. You'll want to take a paper towel and just quickly wipe that off because it's excess oil. You put too much oil on the spoon soaked up oil. It is now kicking out the oil it doesn't need. Wipe it off. So do that for your first like 30 minutes is check every 5 to 10 minutes, wipe off the excess oil. And then after that 30 minutes, everything that came out should be out and just leave it in for a full hour. So it's 170 degrees for an hour, checking to wipe off the excess oil. At the end of that hour, I just turn the oven off and then I'll take the spoons out and then put them on the counter, get ready for another oil application. I like to oil my spoons while they're still warm. Use really thin coats though, because if you're oiling to like get the oil to soak into the spoon, you're gonna have a lot of it bubbling back out. And then that's a lot of management of that bubbling oil and more likely to get a sticky finish. So thin coat of oil, oven, 170 degrees, check it often, use a paper towel or a cloth to wipe the excess oil off. You don't have to rub it, just like wipe it off, put it back in, keep curing it. If you had a spoon with like really runny, smeary milk paint, so if this rag was blue, you would put it in there, wipe the excess oil off, leave it in for an hour, take your other spoons out, but leave this in with the oven turned off and leave it in until the oven fully cools. So that's like another 2 hours that the oven will still have some latent temperature. And that'll help just give it a longer curing process. And then I found that the paint usually settles itself down and isn't as smeary. You'll do another coat of oil for like a day 2. I do at least 2 coats of oil. I like to do 3 on things that are going to be used in like heavy rotation. And each day, if it's still smearing, give it more time. Like you want to get it to a point where it's not smearing. That means everything's stable, good to go. And then you're done with your curing. So I do, again, an hour, 170 degrees, checking it to wipe off excess oil. I'll do that day 1, take them out, put another coat of oil on, and then I'll just roast them or cook them the next morning. So does that make sense? Any questions on my process? And then I'll have others share their oven curing processes.
So for those of us who don't have an oven that goes down that low, or a partner who will let us use their oven, have you ever used, I know, with bowls, you can set them outside in the sunshine.
Yep.
After they're oiled as a way of accelerating the curing. I've done that with spoons in the past myself.
Sunshine works fantastic. So this summer, like Washington had a couple 100-degree weeks because it's hot now. And we had a ton of sunshine, direct sunshine. I would just put the spoons out there oiled. We have a little table that gets really good direct sunlight, and they do that oven curing within the sunshine. So if you're lucky enough to be in a hot, sunny area, you can absolutely do this oil curing process outside. This is more for the Pacific Northwesterners that have a lot of rain, a lot of gray skies. Does sun really exist for 8 to 10 months a year? We don't know. Or if you need to rush a batch for like a gift order. I don't sell spoons, but if you've got like a big order and you need to get 20 spoons out the door in a week, you have them painted. You can't let them necessarily shelf cure. But sun, if you've got direct warm sunlight, and I know Kevin uses he'll throw a little, I don't know if it's a plastic or a glass box to make it's almost like a little greenhouse effect. That'll really cure the oil faster. And then I know a few people have made, because they don't have an oven or maybe they need to cook food for sustenance, they'll make a light bulb curing box, and that works very well. I don't have one of those, so I just use the oven in the mornings when I'm cleaning the kitchen. Spoons are curing and cooking in my oven all the time.
Kaylyn?
Yep.
Two things. I found I'm using synthetic steel wool. I don't know if you can see it in my video, but it wasn't Scotch-Brite pads. It's called synthetic steel wool. And here's a example of those red spoons I've been doing. It does take a lot of the dust off the spoon while you're burnishing it. So I just wanted to show everyone that. And then the second thing, I visited Dawson Moore before the pandemic started, and when he was really into doing a lot of spoons for the market and doing them weekly, he did make a big light bulb curing box with a couple racks in it. And he was curing his half and half in that box, and it seemed to work extremely well to get a quick 24-hour cure in a light bulb box if you don't have an oven or anything like that.
That's fantastic, Paul. And thanks for that shout out as well. Like, if you're into milk paint, Dawson right now is doing a lot more furniture, but he has had some incredible Instagram stories on using milk paint for furniture and really getting the mixing consistent. And he even got like this little, it's like what you would use in a science lab, a beaker with a little magnet that spins on a pedestal. And he mixes his milk paint like that. And then he uses the anti-foaming agent to get a really good consistency. And so Dawson's an excellent, if you guys aren't following him already, really, really great milk paint resource out there for sure. Thanks, Paul. And the synthetic steel wool, maybe
a scientific approach to everything.
Yeah, and he's even the one that did like a curing oil durability test where he waited a year and then chipped it off to see how good it is. And I think he's got that saved in his Instagram stories. So if you want to go back and take a look at that, he's a wealth of information. And I think maybe that synthetic steel wool doesn't deteriorate as much as the real steel does for the steel fibers. So that's a great.
Yeah, that's just the generic name. Scotch-Brite's the brand name. It's the exact same thing.
Same thing. Okay.
Synthetic steel wool. Nice. Cheaper.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pop off though. I'm on my data. So have a good day, guys.
Good to see you. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
So here we have 2 oiled spoons ready, burnished for the oven. And again, I will do at least 2 coats of oil on this. I'll probably do 3. I like the effect of 3 coats of oil. I think the durability lasts really nicely. The water just beads up and runs off of them. And then I don't feel like it feels too oiled. Like it doesn't feel plastic. You can still feel that it's a nice wooden spoon. Any other questions on an oil curing oven process? Anyone else oven cure and want to share their temperatures and their times? I think Michael from Seattle, I don't think he's on this morning, but he oven cures. And he'll just turn his oven off and leave the spoons in overnight after his 1 hour. And I think his oven goes down to like 120 degrees, which is really nice. Cool. And I think that's all I got for you. Baking soda, baking spoons, lots of paint, some different paint techniques, oven curing. Hopefully you all are able to have some fun and decorate your spoons. And
Well, one more
Yeah.
question, Kaylyn.
Yeah.
After the oiling, do you use waxes at all?
I don't. And it's mainly because I use a lot of hot water when I'm cooking and eating. Like I eat soups all the time. I eat chilies all the time. I do a lot of cooking that's in like a boiling pot of water. And I feel like the wax, when that heat is applied, it just comes off. So I'll use it on like scoops because I have scoops that are more for dry goods. So I like to do, I made it myself. I just got wax off of the Real Milk paint and used the hemp oil. So it's hemp oil and wax. And I'll apply that because I think that gives it a really nice satiny feel and look.
Yeah.
So I do like that. And on eating spoons, I'll use it a little more, but my cooking spoons, I just stopped using it because I cook with hot, boily water a lot.
Speaking of Real Milk paint, they have another nice product that I just fallen in love with. It's called the Wood Wax. It's a blend of canuba wax and walnut oil. So, if you're not painting or anything, that's what I use just to give it get the oil in there and the and light wax.
Cool.
It's great. I like
That's great. That's excellent. Anyone else?
I had some good experience with, it's nothing about milk paint, but I was making some elderberry juice, and I just played around with it on the wood, and it gives a nice color too. And I think especially for ebonizing, it makes a really nice purple black color. So so you get really like a really blackish purpley color. So I think they are in the elderberries, there's a lot of tannins. So you were mentioning some black tea before to get a little bit more color when you do the baking soda stuff. So I was playing around with this elderberry juice and had a very good result and with ebonizing that.
That's excellent.
And it has like a nice purple color too.
That's beautiful.
But my question maybe to the group, my question to the group is your opinion about ebonizing, because I lately heard a few times that it's sort of not that healthy or something like that.
I like it. I think it's fun.
Okay. I like it too, but someone said it is iron something and not really sort of healthy.
I've only ebonized one spoon, and I just did the handle and left kind of the bowl open. And it was a gift spoon. Actually, Patrice has got that one, so it's a little bit more art than utility. So I unfortunately cannot answer anything to ebonizing. But I will say, Real Milk paint makes some very nice black paints. If you want to just paint a handle, you would lose some of the weight.
Patricia was showing the one that, it's beautiful.
I find it difficult to believe that there would be any kind of health risk with ebonizing, because a little bit of iron in your diet is actually a good thing. And I know that one of the ways that you can supplement iron in your diet is by straight up putting a pure iron object in your pasta water, for example, when you cook your pasta, and or by using like cast iron pans or anything that there are actually lots of things that leach iron into food. And I think a wooden spoon would not be a significant source.
Also depends if you oil over the top of the ebonizing as well, because obviously that seals it in.
Right. Same with the wax.
Yeah.
I use cast iron quite a bit.
That's a good reason.
Cooking, but I don't know what kind of oils or what kind of other contaminants might be in steel wool. And I imagine if you wash it out, you know, if you wash the spoon, it's probably going to be okay. And I'm sure on a daily basis, we take in a lot of pretty harsh toxins.
Well, microplastics. I mean, we're all walking around with a bunch of them in our bodies.
Yeah.
And if I can pause the conversation, I lost my, oh, there it is. I have a feeling my phone that I've got this main view on is getting unhappy. So I might just stop the recording before my phone crashes. But we can keep the conversation going. Because I'm gonna finish oiling up the rest of these spoons and working on them today. So, but I might, if everyone's okay, I may end that recording.
Yeah, so first of all, a big thank you, Kaylyn, for that nice show. It was really interesting. I was not really into milk paint before, but maybe now I'm hooked a little bit.
Good. I'm hopeful.
Thank you very much.
A few more people open to the idea of painting spoons, because some people are a bit scared of it, but it's not scary.
I'll reiterate, George, a great session, Kaylyn. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording.